There was a certain merchant who had been with a very famous guru for many years. And this guru held his meetings, his gatherings, outdoors by a large body of water. One day, when the merchant was attending the master's discourses, the discourse went on for a longer time than usual. And after its completion, the merchant hurried over to the master and said, "Master, I have an important meeting on the other side of the lake and I must leave to catch the ferry." And the master said, "My son, don't be concerned about the ferry." And he took a leaf from the ground nearby and he wrote on it, folded it over and gave it to the merchant and said, "Make your way directly across the lake." And so the merchant stepped out onto the water and found himself able to walk with ease without even wetting his feet across the lake. But then when he was about halfway across the lake, he suddenly thought to himself, "I wonder what it is that the master has written." And so he opened the leaf and read what was written there. And the merchant saw that it was the name of Rama. And he thought to himself, "Oh, it's only the name of Rama." And with that, he sank into the depths of the lake. And then you remember that story about that other guru who also used to have his meetings by a lake in the open. And a milkmaid would come, catching the ferry across the lake to attend his meetings. But very often the ferry was late, so she arrived in the middle of his discourses. One day, he quite angrily said to her, "Why are you always late for my meetings?" And she explained that often the ferryman left later than was designated. And he said to her, "You foolish woman, why do you not call the name of Rama and make your own way across the water?" So the very next day, as the Guru was sitting there, waiting for the moment to start his discourse, when across the water came the milkmaid, delicately taking step by step on the surface of the lake. He was quite aghast. And when she arrived, he asked her, "How did you do that?" And she said, "I did what you told me. I called on the name of Rama." The Guru was greatly surprised, and he thought to himself, "Well, if she can do it, I can do it also." So after his discourse, he stepped out into the water, calling the name of Rama, and sank immediately to the bottom of the lake. And then finally, there's a story about Naropa. Now, Naropa was born to a mixed caste. His father was a liquor seller and his mother was a wash maiden. It was expected that he would become a liquor seller like his father, but when that time came, he refused, and he became a wood gatherer, going to the forest, gathering wood. But he was not happy, always not at ease. But one day, when he'd stopped by a coffee shop on his way home, he heard tell of a great guru by the name of Tilopa. When he heard this name, his heart came up to his throat. He began to tremble inside, and he knew without a moment of doubt or thought that Tilopa was his guru, and in that moment he decided he would find Tilopa. And so he set out. But everywhere he went, he found that Tilopa had been and gone. And this went on for years. And then, one day, he was walking down the road and coming the other way was a being. Naropa's heart rose up to his throat and he trembled as he did when he heard that name. Excuse me. And he knew this was his guru. He danced around him, made prostrations in front of him, calling him my guru. At last I found you, my guru. Tilopa looked at him and said, I've never seen you before in my life and I don't want to see you again. Get out of my sight, out of my sight. And he beat him with his staff. But Naropa was not to be deterred. He followed Tilopa. He became his faithful servant. He begged in the villages and brought the food back to Tilopa. But not once did Tilopa look at him. Not once did Tilopa acknowledge his presence. But Naropa remained totally dedicated and devoted until one day they came to a village. And at that time, a very rich merchant was having a wedding feast for his daughter. And at that wedding feast, there were 36 kinds of curries. One in particular was said to be the nectar of the gods. And so very graciously, the merchant gave portions of all the curries to Naropa to take back to his guru. When Naropa brought the dishes to Tilopa, and Tilopa tasted this particular expensive, exotic, delicious curry to him, he scraped the plates clean, looked around and smiled at Naropa. Naropa's heart went out. He smiled at me. And so Tilopa said, could you bring more? So Naropa went back and got another portion of all of the curries, which Tilopa quickly devoured, and then looked at him and thanked him. Thank you, my son. Oh, Naropa's heart was flowing open. He called me my son. But then Tilopa asked Naropa to go back 5 times to get more curry, which he did. And after the 5th time, he asked him again, "Please bring me more." But Naropa was ashamed. "How can I, when they've been so gracious to me, ask for more?" But Tilopa looked at him beseechingly, again called him my son, such a good son. And so Naropa got up and resolved that he would steal the curry. He went back to the gathering, and while the servants were occupied and the guests were involved in the ceremony, Naropa stole some of the precious delicacy and brought it back to Tilopa. Tilopa again, looking at him lovingly, congratulated him on his humility and again abolished the last of the curry. After this, Tilopa gave initiation to Naropa, who in a very short space of time attained the highest state of realization and became a great, great teacher in his own right. Mixing the chemistry of these 3 stories, what is it that arises in us as our awareness of what they mean? What is the deep meaning of that which arises from the chemistry of these 3 stories for you?
In the first story, when the guy decided to look at the leaf and see what was written on it and saw the name of Rama, he went back into his mind. So that's what made him sink, because he was no longer in the spirit which was floating him along. And in the next story, when the Guru tried to do the same thing, it was exactly the same, because he was also in his mind, not really in the spirit.
And the third story.
In the third story, the Guru rejected him because he wasn't coming from the right attitude. And in the end, he had to overcome everything, including his shame, to be able, and thinking it was all terrible he was doing it, to overcome everything. And then he was able to be accepted by his Guru.
So what's the awareness that arises for each of us from this? Has it got anything to do with your mind?
No.
Anything? Where does that place us now? Where does it place you in relationship to your mind?
Seems like the link between the three stories is faith and this pure innocence and trust and following this path that is opened and doing whatever arises to maintain the path and trusting in that. And the beings along the way, or the part of the being that falters, falls from the path or sinks.
Right on. So let's move right on from there.